Hi everyone, welcome to the arguably first major part of this course, which is going through the cyclical design theory. Of course, we've got to get through kind of the talky, boring bits first before we get into the good stuff, but I promise I won't take up too much of your time. I just thought this might be a helpful thing to explore before we actually get into actually creating anything in 3D. So, what is cyclical design theory? Well, honestly, it's, as the tagline suggests there, it's putting creative freedom first. It's something I won't claim I pioneered or anything like that. It's rather something that my brain warped what it saw in high school one day into something I thought, well, you know what, that kind of works for 3D stuff as well. And I thought it was helpful and I wanted to share it with you guys. So, what we're kind of used to, maybe if you're a designer or an artist or anything kind of creative, you're probably used to this typical sort of process that evolved from a generic product design, let's say. You'd have a start, you'd have a finish. Now, of course, you know, this cyclical design theory obviously has a start and a finish. It's nothing that revolutionary, but it's a little bit less linear. So at the beginning, you might start with something called a design brief, something that gives you details on what you might want to build, a problem you might want to solve, etc., etc. And then from that list, you'll kind of create a specification sheet as in terms of what exactly this new product that you're building is going to solve, what it will have, and you might do some preliminary kind of feasibility research into how viable this solution is. Then if it all goes well, you might make some ideas, sketch something down on a tea towel or a bit of tissue, or hopefully some generic standard paper would be helpful. And then if that all goes well and everything like that, we'll move on to looking at materials and be like, well, what are we going to make it out of? Are we going to make it out of plastic? Are we going to use wood? What have you? Okay, and then you'll probably move on to actually modeling some parts of the concept. So you might want to start building prototypes or elements of a prototype to see how they all fit together. And then it's on to the nice part, which is the actual building of the prototype whilst keeping your fingers tightly crossed that everything goes well. And then once that's all done and nice, then you might want to decorate it. You want to paint it and, you know, basically be like, well, let's make it look pretty now and appealing and what have you. And then add your finishing touches and, last but not least, do a little bit of evaluation and obviously some marketing if the product's great and you want to send it out there to the world. But of course you will be evaluating as well, like evaluating, well, did I meet the goals I set out in the beginning and did it actually solve the problem? That's the biggest question. So this section over here, these three parts here, you could argue was the conceptualization part, despite the fact that the word concept's used over here. But largely speaking, these three ideas are, if you kind of stick with me a little bit, that's kind of what I like to think of as the conceptualization stage. And over here is more the manufacturing, more the doing stage. Okay, so this is kind of thinking, maybe committing some raw ideas to paper, but this is where the actual kind of production begins, if you like. Okay, again, this is nothing that's like, you know, endorsed by any school of thought. This is just how my noggin particularly works. Okay, so let's go through those points there. We'll plot that line again. We'll kind of adapt it a little bit for a typical character modeling process or pipeline. So we'll put in our start and finish. We'll change our design brief to specifically a character brief. So what does our character, what's it going to be like? What are we going to do? What do we want to make? And then we'll gather some references from the internet, i.e. making our own kind of specification sheet and looking at ideas. And then our idea generation is concept art. We might draw some sketches and what have you, or we might ask somebody else to help draw some sketches for our character. And then if you're working in a business or the games industry or what have you, you'll probably send that up to your line manager or your senior artist for an approval and concept evaluation. And if that all kind of turns out well, you move on to kind of blocking out the mesh. So you finally enter 3D space. You'll start with the elements, build the body out, build the head, what have you, start building the clothes. And then you'll start to move into more detailed sculpting. So we're moving away from maybe, I don't know, software like Blender and Maya to something like ZBrush and sculpting tools and adding in all that nice, wonderful detail. And then from that, you'll create the game resolution model. So we're starting to get closer and closer to the actual game character and what they look like. We bring down all those millions and millions of polygons down to thousands of polygons. Not an easy feat by any means. Then we'll do the nice texturing bits, so we'll actually get the skin to look like skin. We'll get the fabric to look like fabric. We'll get the hair to Well, we'll get the hair to as best as we can, because let's face it, hair is one of the most annoying things to get right. And then we'll do, instead of finishing touches, we might want to rig it up, obviously for animation, especially if we're making a game character. You might be in charge of rigging and skinning and then kind of performing some basic animation. And then, instead of evaluation and marketing, of course, we will do some evaluating as well, but you'll probably want to hit a nice render and get a couple of turntable videos out, or still images, okay? So to kind of group all that up there, we've still got these three kind of sections here. We can call that pre-production. So instead of conceptualization, that's the pre-production phase, and then all this part here is, you guessed it, the production phase, okay? Pretty simple so far. So you can see that we've taken that kind of generic product design start to finish line, adapted it for a character modeling start to finish line. So where does this cyclical business come into play? Well, this is basically what I propose. This is the, what can we say, the reaction going on in my head. It might be a small amount of lunacy in there, but anyway, I'll share it with you. But before we go ahead, I must state, it's not studio or art director friendly. If you're going to say, oh boss, I've got this great idea, we're going to do cyclical design, it totally worked for this character artist, I'm totally going to employ it, your boss may meet this with some resistance, because it is an incredibly time-consuming process. You might be thinking, well, why is that? And I'll lay it out for you nice and clearly. So I'm going to borrow some high school and college design logic to help me explain this. I'm going to borrow something from the International Baccalaureate in specifics here. Now this looks quite complicated, doesn't it? You're looking at this and you're going, well, where do I start? Exactly. Where do you start? Okay, this is the thing, it's kind of the problem with a cyclical kind of design thinking. But let's say we start up here at the top, we can go forward but back, then we go forward and back again, or we can go out here. I mean, what is all of that? You're right, let me simplify that for you. We'll keep two sections here like this. I'm just going to tell you for now that is the conceptualization and pre-production part, and you guessed it, the purple part there is the manufacturing production. So that linear scale has roughly been divided to share half of this circle. Now if I've lost you still, let me just go ahead and simplify it even more for you, okay? Now this is a heck of a lot more understandable if you ask me. We've got very clear kind of clear-cut sections here. Okay, the arrows still kind of jump backwards and forwards, but it's not a complete comprehensive, like, wow, what am I looking at here? There's sentences I've got to read, you know? So just simplifying it into keywords instead, and the same two areas very much remain kind of encompassing those halves of the circles, okay? So adapting it for our purposes, we're not going to go with identifying needs, researching and generating ideas, even though that is broadly suitable to what we're going to be doing. I'm going to change it up a little bit. Okay, so we'll keep the two halves, but instead of the idea, it's a what was it called? Identifying needs. We're going to put in our character idea there. Okay, so that's where our character brief comes in. That's how we're going to think about what our character is, or what do we want our character to be. And then we're going to, for example, one of the characters I might want to kind of tweak this character towards is Lady Maria from Bloodborne. So that's a, you know, good concept to go off with, I think. And then we'll just go with a single direction arrow right now. We'll move over to references and inspirations, which kind of mirrors the research part there. So we'll kind of establish a mood board of ideas to kind of get ourselves going. And then moving on from that, from generating ideas, we'll produce some concept art. Now, full disclosure, my concept art that I'll be showing you in the later videos is not fantastic. So please don't expect some industry grade wonderful art. It's very much just stuff I do to get by. Okay, but through that we'll be able to explore some ideas and different outfits and different sets and etc. to see which one kind of looks right. And then on to that we'll go to, from developing solutions, we'll change this to our block mesh base mesh kind of phase, where we'll actually go into Marvelous Designer. I'll share with you a base mesh for this particular course, and we'll take it into Marvelous Designer and start making the kind of base clothes. Then we'll carry on and we'll do modeling, sculpting and texturing. This is the chunky part of the course, where we're really going to sink our teeth into actually making the the nice detail, making the game res mesh, doing the texturing and whatnot. And from then on, we'll move over to actual evaluation. So this doesn't change. Okay, so once we've kind of made the character and it's getting near to completion, we come back and we evaluate it. Just how successful were we when we compare it back to the character idea. Now that's what these kind of arrows mean, and for granted right now they're going in a single direction, which suggests you can't go backwards and forwards. But for now, if you just bear with me that just going around the circle here, this is the general flow that we'll be using in this course here. Okay, but like I said before, we had arrows going the opposite direction. So what does that mean? Where does that come into it? Well, for example, your character idea, let's just say, your character idea might be so strong, you feel like you just want to produce some concept art. You know, you've got a really, really good image in your brain. You don't really maybe want to get distracted by things you might find on the internet. You might just want to sketch out a couple of pieces of art before you go looking for inspirations and references. Or you might be deciding that after your concept art, hey, you might just want to, you know, skip the block mesh, space mesh part. We'll just go straight to modeling. You know, we'll kind of do a ZBrush technique where we'll just go in and quickly sculpt something and see what our concept art looks like in 3D before we, you know, waste time building a base mesh. I just want to quickly sculpt what it looks like in 3D. We're using ZBrush. And then from that phase, you might go, okay, I know what it looks like in 3D now. Let's go back and look for some references. We'll look for some detail. Okay, I've got the general idea of what my character looks like in 3D, but I don't know the details. Like they've got gloves, but I need to see in more detail what kind of gloves I could grow them into. Maybe I want straps here and there, or I want a particular type of glove, a particular type of belt, or what have you. And then you might even go wild. You might be reaching the evaluation stage and you might be going, you know what? Our character kind of looks a little bit funky. I need to go back to the references and inspirations section and really compare it. Did I miss the mark by the time I got to this section? Okay, so that's the idea there of this kind of randomness where everything is all over the place. I just give you some examples there to help explain the back and forth process you can have with this kind of thinking. So let's flip that over into this nice fresh diagram here. Okay, so you see the arrows now, they now move both forward and back, and then I've put the infinity symbol in the center there, suggesting and showing to you that you can jump between any of these steps at any given time. Okay, now of course these arrows here are limited. I can't represent every single possible direction, but you could jump from this one to that one to this one, that one to this one, that one to this one, that one to that one. Okay, the arrows there are just there to keep it nice and clean, because if I drew arrows everywhere, it would just look as chaotic as the first one I showed you. Okay, but basically what is my purpose in explaining this to you is that for me, whenever I've made a character and I've tried to follow a linear fashion, it never works out that way. Now that might be a limitation on my brain cells perhaps don't function in that way, but my brain cells function in this way. This makes sense to me. It might make sense to you as well, okay? I feel like doing it this way, you can create a character that you'll be happy with. This whole backwards and forwards process also encourages you to strive for the thing you really want to make and not get too worried and too discouraged if you feel like you're at the modeling and sculpting section. You're like, oh, you know what? Something is kind of off. Maybe I should go and look at my concept art and edit it a little bit. Don't be afraid. Absolutely do that. Get it right. Make sure you like it. Make sure you can make the best thing you can make and get it out there for everyone else to see. Okay, that's the idea behind this whole cyclical design theory thinking. Okay, that's the idea there. So let me explain a kind of succinctly why the madness, essentially. That's basically it. It ensures your creative freedom, which is why I said it's probably not line manager or senior artist or, you know, boss friendly, because you'll be doing this until you're happy, and that can be any length of time. I've worked on characters that can take weeks, months, and a year as well, you know, because I've just left it in the development oven, or I've fallen so far down the valley of the suck, I do not remember which way is up anymore. Okay, either way, it gives me the creative freedom I would like for each character I do. It also encourages frequent evaluation. It allows you to give artistic direction over any kind of strenuous timeline, you're working in a production fashion and whatnot, which like I said, it's not ideal if you're working in a team or you're working in a group, okay? Artistic direction usually takes second seating there. And your vision for the character remains intact, okay? If that's what you wanted, if you're so sure about, I want to make this character and I'm really sure about it, by going backwards and forwards between the steps, or at least being encouraged to do so, you can ensure that you're going to have that kind of solidarity all the way through, okay? And then promotes adaptability, which is one positive, I guess, career skill, because you're constantly jumping backwards and forwards between different stages and whatnot to get the thing to look correctly, to get everything working as you would expect it to be, okay? And last but not least, quality over quantity, okay? Yes, you could make lots of characters if you made one once every week, or twice, 2 characters every week if you like. But are you going to be that happy? You might be. You might be a fantastic artist, and unlike me, you could probably put out an amazing character in a week's time and be completely happy about it. But for somebody like me, I can't do that. You know, for my characters, if I want them to be the way I want them to be, it's going to take quite a bit of time, okay? So that's just generally what I wanted to share with you there. So getting you critically to reflect on every step of the way, it gives you a higher chance you actually end up with something you like. You can stick to the specifications you laid out in the very beginning. You can go back and forth between any stage to make sure it's the idea you want to go ahead and make. And like I said before, it's okay to leave things in the oven or spend some quality time in the Valley of the Suck. We all do. I do especially, more often than I'd like, but that's the reality of the situation, okay? So thanks for watching and going through all that with me, guys. I'm sorry it took a little bit longer than I meant it to. We are actually going to go and get started now. Now, just for clarity's sake, in this course here, I'm going to do my best, almost counterintuitively, to try and keep it smoothly progressing forward in a linear fashion, just so that the course is not insanely long. There might be parts of this course where I just feel like, okay, I could change this idea here, but I just won't for at the moment, because it would take too much time to deviate in that direction, because we might be here for hours and hours and hours, okay? But I will show you every single step I do take from start to finish, okay? But that restriction is not applied to you. If you'd like to go ahead and you say, hey, you know what? I like my character if they had a hat. Go ahead, go back, add a hat. But I might just be like, well, I would like to add a hat, but it would take about 7 hours to go ahead and do that, so I'm not going to do that, you know, so things like that. But that restriction is not on you, so go ahead, let your creative freedom go, and let's go ahead and examine our character brief.